Okay, we're looking today at Shin Chav Dal Halach Yud Aleph. I'm actually not going to read the thing to you. It's a little complicated. Not so. I'll read you the parts as we need to. Okay, what we're going to be talking today is the main thing is about the Tevel Matzah or the Tevel dough system, okay, which we've talked about a bunch of times. Which means is someone makes a batch of Tevel, they're not Hafrashah from it, and then they put it in the factory where they're going to do the Hafrashah. What we do with dough, and other people do with matzah. For today's purposes, that's the same. For the bulk of what we're going to talk about today, it's the same. And then, every time they need to make a Hafrashah at that company, they say another little piece from that dough, or from that matzah is now challah for the thing that was just made. So, in order for that to work, if you think through the logic of what happens, there's two steps that have to happen in order for that to work. And the first is that you could be mafresh from one batter on another batter. Okay, what we're doing is we're mafresh from the tevel, let's say matzah, onto the cake that the company just made. So one thing is that you have to be able to make hafrashah from one thing onto something else. Okay, that then is a number of times. It actually is in halach yud aleph also, for what it's worth. And that is, there's a case of a person who got tevel mixed into his challah, mixed into his chulin. So one of the eights that gives an halach yud aleph is that you should do is make another batter and then be mafresh challah from the other batter onto this. Okay, it's a way to pot your tevel. So you could be it's been a few times, this point, which is you could be mafresh from one batter on another batter. You don't have to say mafresh from the batter by itself. Okay? So you need that in order for this tevel system to work, because you want to be mafresh from your, let's say, your matzah on your cake that you just made, so you have to be mafresh from a different batter. So that's pretty accepted that you could do that. The second part is, the second thing, which is what we're going to talk about, is we're making an assumption that when you're mafresh from one batter on another batter, it's possible to be mafresh on the second batter, and the first batter stays tevel. That's what we need. Over here, we want to say we're making a hafrashah from this batter A, onto batter B, and we want batter A to stay tevel. In our case, the matzah. We want the matzah to stay tevel because we want to use it for hafrashah tomorrow. Okay, so what we want to do is do hafrashah on something else. That's pretty accepted. But we want to do hafrashah on something else and keep this thing itself tevel. We're pulling off this piece saying you're challah for that, but this itself stays tevel. I'm coming to it. And if that wouldn't be true, if that would not be true, then this would be worthless, because it only worked once. I mean, once we did it one hafrashah, the whole thing would be gone. Okay, so we need that in order for it to work. Okay, so we will eventually, when we get later on, we'll get back to, there's a raya from Aruch into that Shiloh. Okay, but we're going to start from the beginning. Okay, we're going to start from a different angle. A lot of what I'm going to say to you today comes from a tshuva Shlomo Miller wrote about 20 years ago, and a tshuva in Minchas Sitzuk. They very much cover the same things. So a lot of what I'm going to say to you comes from there. Okay, and that's like this. A lot of people who talk about Hafrashas Challah do so in Hilchos Pesach. Okay, it's in Aruch in Taflin Zayin. A lot of because they talks about Hafrashas Challah for matzah, when you bake the matzah. So the Makar Chaim over there, that's in the Sivas, over there says like this. He says, it's true that when you're mafresh truma from one batch of apples on somebody else's, it's possible to do the hafrashah that the original thing stays tevel. Let's say I have a batch of apples over here, I'm mafresh on some apples that are a different batch of apples. I could do it in a way that the original batch stays tevel. He says, but that's not true for challah. He says it's true for truma, but not for challah. For challah, if I'm mafresh challah from one batch and something else, I could do that for something else. But the original batch becomes completely chulun. So the challah works completely for this batch also. Okay? He talks a little bit about a reason. My understanding of what he's saying is like this: that there's an inherent difference between most truma and the truma that we call challah. There's an inherent difference, and that is the following: when you make truma, there's no built-in unit to truma. Let's say you have apples. You pull 100 apples off the tree. Those apples have nothing to do with each other. I mean, they came from the same tree, and maybe they had miruach at the same time, but basically, the apples are independent. Each apple is by itself. So if I do hafrashah on one apple, that doesn't have anything to do with the next apple. If I do hafrashah from this apple, it doesn't have anything to do with the apple that was next to it, that it should become tevel. There's nothing that binds them together. But by challah, of course, we've mentioned this, it's very different. Challah, flour is not chayv in challah. Flour is potter from challah. When you mix flour with water in a very specific way, and you mitzarech it the right way also, and you have a shear, there's a whole thing, there's a whole way you create, you've now had a unit, that unit is chayv l'challah. So there's a sense that says that even though for regular truma, when you can be mafresh and leave the thing as tevel behind. Over here, this whole unit is becoming either it is challah, it's tevel, or it's chulin. But it can't be part and part. The logic says that for a thing itself, it's a unit. And either it's tevel or it's chulin, but it can't be in between. A little bit we mafresh challah for that, and the rest of it stays behind this now. Okay? That's the logic. He says, when he starts off, he says, Makar Chaim says, this is misvara, he thinks it's true. Okay? Not too clear what he says, so I'm explaining to you a little bit what I think. But he says, misvara, it's got to be true. He brings a raya, if we have a chance, we'll get back to it. He brings a raya from a Taz and a Shach in a few siman. What? Well, let me finish. He brings a raya from a Shach and Taz. He talks about a Shach and Taz over here, we'll get to that in a second of it. But he brings a raya from a Shach and Taz in Shin Chavav. We've got to play with the cases over there. The thing over there is they're talking about, as there used to be this minhag that people did, that they would bake for a simcha, they bake a huge challah, and every lady would come up and would take off a piece and be mafresh challah. Okay? And the place was very upset about it.
Take a piece and be mafresh challah from the
big challah event.
Like last night's, Wednesday nights. I'm not sure if, it wasn't clear to me if the ladies would do it when it was still dough, or the ladies would do it somehow after simcha, they would each pull off a piece of challah. It wasn't clear to me what they were doing.
So you pull up a piece and then you mafresh
challah on my piece. I pulled up shir challah.
I can pull up a big piece and take off, then off my piece I took off, I take off another piece.
Hafrashas challah.
On my piece, on the whole thing.
Right, but 50 ladies would do that. Okay, maybe every person in town, each family would do one person would pull it off, and this whole Hafrashas challah event would go on at Chasanas. Okay? It has to do with Chasanas. Okay? Mistamba has to do with, because, Mishmur brings about that Chava was Kifsa, Nevish, Olam, and the Ish Mafresh Challah on Fridays. Probably has to do with that. Okay? That was the meaning. Every lady would be Mafresh Challah at the wedding, or every one lady in the house, and there was this huge Hafrashas Challah, and the person was very upset about it. Okay? So he understands that among what they said is the reason why they were upset is because as soon as the first lady is Mafresh Challah, the whole thing is tevel. So everybody else, the whole thing is chulin. The whole thing is chulin. So everybody else is wasting their time. Okay, everybody else is making brachas of Torah. They're all being mafresh challah, and there's no challah to be mafresh because the whole thing is tevel. The first lady who comes to the chasana,
why?
She will not be challah.
There's 100 pounds challah. I take off a pound, and off the pound I
you took off 5 pounds. You took off 5 pounds.
2 ounces.
Yeah.
What?
You took off 5 pounds.
5 pounds.
Share challah.
5 pounds. And here's my 5 pounds. I'm taking off a half a pound to be mafresh.
Yeah, but it was 5
pounds.
Right. Exactly. And Makar Chaim says, you see from there, that when you have a batch made at once, if you're mafresh challah on part of it, the whole thing comes chulin. That's exactly what he wants to bring. That's exactly what he's trying to prove. That when you're mafresh challah from a batter, the whole thing comes
They want
chulin.
me to use dough. 100 pound dough.
Even though I had in mind what to do for my piece, my 5 pounds that I pulled off, even though I only had in mind for my piece, even so it's challah for the whole thing, that's exactly what he's trying to bring right. That
Chai was the 100 pounds, not the 5 pounds.
the unit is what he's kind of challah. The original unit of this monster is challah, and so I make a hafrashah on part of it, the whole thing becomes chulin at once, and everybody else is wasting their time.
It's not exactly the case of the total system.
Because
No, wait, no.
Let's talk about it.
I thought. I mean, you see, it's not the same thing. Over here, there's a big dough, and I'm taking off a piece, right? And then I'm being mafresh from this piece that I took off, only on my piece, but it works for the whole dough.
Right.
Over there, I have a piece of tevel, and I'm taking off a piece of tevel to mafresh on that dough.
Okay.
They stay the same.
Okay.
They never change.
So, good point. I'm going to say what you said in different words, okay? Which is as follows. Before I...
This is the second place.
No. So Roshon Miller told the Sarbelsky, and he told him, he says, so you have this idea that you can make these tevel matzahs, you see from the Makar Chaim that you can't do that. Okay? So Rich Sarbelsky asked him a question back. He said to him, which is going to lead to what you said. He says to him, the Makar Chaim says that if you mafresh challah as soon as you mafresh challah from within the batter, the whole batter becomes tevel. The whole batter becomes chulin, and you can't mafresh afterwards. He says, how can the Makar Chaim say that? He says, there's a Mishnah that says not like that. He says, there's the Mishnah in Challah, not in Trumas. The Mishnah in Challah says that in a special case, it's Challah, a tel of Demai, it's Demai, which is a little negates what we have to say, but it's a special case, and you have to be mafresh. So the Mishnah says what you should do is take a batter of tevel, put it on the side, and you'll keep being mafresh from that batter of tevel on the Demai that you're going to have. Okay, now the Mishnah is specific to Demai because you have to do it min hatar al tamdei, and you have to do it not min amukov. So there's a special reason why it's looking at Demai. But L'maisa, the Mishnah says is what you should do is make a batter of tevel, make tevel matzahs, put them on the side, and then you use them for future hafrashas. He says, so how can the Makar Chaim, this is Rabelski's question, he says, how can the Makar Chaim have said that you can't, that you could, once something becomes, once you're mafresh challah, it's over? Why didn't, I don't see there's a Mishnah that says you're allowed to do this. My tevel matzah system is a Beferish Mishnah. That's what he said. So what's the answer? So Rabelski himself says, so what's the answer to my question? How can the Makar Chaim say not like a Mishnah? So the answer is, there's a big difference. In the case of the Mishnah, each time the person does the Hafrashah, he's doing Hafrashah on the other batter. He's not trying to be mafresh on his tevel batter. He's only being mafresh on the other batter. So when he's mafresh on the other batter, that whole batter becomes chulin. That's true, the whole batter becomes chulin. In the case of the Makar Chaim, the guy's being mafresh on the batter itself, okay, which is in fact the case of the Makar Chaim. The guy's being mafresh on the batter himself. Makar Chaim's case is the guy had tevel that got mixed in. He doesn't know where it is. And he's being mafresh on one batch, he wants off the other batches becomes pater also. He said, when I'm mafresh on my own batch, so when I'm mafresh on the own batch, then once I'm mafresh on part of the batch, the whole batch becomes covered. So, like the case of the, like Yossi was saying, in the case of the big challah at the chasana, there the person doing hafrashah within this batter of the 100 pounds, I call that my little 5-pound piece, so then I'm doing hafrashah on this piece, the whole challah becomes pater. But if I'm doing hafrashah only on the other thing, I'm not on myself, only for you, then that batter becomes cool, and my batter could stay tevel. Okay, that's what I was going to say. In which case, back to tevel matzah, we're good with the tevel matzah, because I'm making tevel matzah, every time I do hafrashah, I'm doing hafrashah on the other guy's thing.
It's true, it's different. When Lotus is the same word.
Because
you're taking a unit and taking part out of the unit and say, okay, this part of the unit doesn't come with the rest of the unit. My community fits on this and that.
Okay.
The dough that became a chuyiv, he was sacking a chelik of that dough that became a chuyiv,
right.
But who said that if I'm taking from something,
why? Because
I'm being sacking that dough. The kibbutz is sacking
the oneness. It's one unit.
Not the whole thing. Not in all culture and now. You would say everything becomes one unit. There's one specific halach. If this dough became a chuyiv, kol kul as chada isa, you masakin mitzvah isa, you masakin kol isa. But when you masakin from, was a separate piece.
There's automatic. Once I separate that part of that unit and made it tevel and made it challah, so.
I have to tell you, the etzem, I understand what Yossi's saying. I only reason think that you're right is what Shulchan says. He says, in Sfar, I don't understand how Rabelski is being mechalik, okay, which I didn't understand what he was talking about, but I guess you do, because he has something to say. Okay.
The one thing, it's one unit. It's one unit. Once I made the rest is...
Okay, but I have to tell you...
Maybe it only applies to the thing that comes from Sukkot Chol, not to the thing that becomes challah. The thing that becomes challah, you don't say that it's one.
Okay, you guys will argue that, but I have to tell you something. What's not being addressed here, before we continue, is that Rabelski is saying if you fix the batter itself, then I'll agree the Makar Chaim says that the whole batter gets fixed. Okay? Now, it's a little bit, it's a problem. He's ignoring, there's two problems that are over here, which is, first of all, what happens if some guy from this batch, remember, these tevel matzahs are going all over the place. What happens if one of the guys is mafresh challah on the thing itself? Let's see, he decides to be mafresh on the thing, he wants to eat the matzahs. If one guy out there who has these tevel matzahs is mafresh on the batter itself, we're all up the creek. Because we're counting on the fact that no one's going to ever be mafresh on the batter itself. Rabbi is saying, if you're mafresh on yourself, the whole thing becomes chulin. Only if you're mafresh on other things. But if we use tevel dough like we do, then it's sort of in our own control. We have our tevel dough. We know we'll only be mafresh on other things. But if we give a tevel matzahs to the whole world, we
don't give it up.
What do you say?
We don't give it up.
Well, the people who give... No, we don't. No, because we make it each place for itself. I mean, we do make tevel dough, put it into the place. So we know what we're doing. Yeah, but worse than that is, it's not just a theoretical, is someone going to maybe want to be mafresh challah? In fact, seemingly, it's automatic to give mafresh challah. And that's as follows. When you make tevel matzah, not tevel dough, when you make tevel matzah, you have to bake it. Well, when you bake it, you just made your oven treif. So the matzah oven just became treif because you baked tevel in it. You're not allowed to kosher food in it. So what's the answer? How do they make it kosher? So they could kosher it. There are some people who would kosher that oven, but there's a simple answer. And the answer is, the mafresh challah on all the blias. Okay, we'll get to that. Okay, the mafresh challah on the blias that were just absorbed into the oven. So what do? When they're finished, let's say they spend the whole day making tevel matzahs, and then when the day is over, they take a piece of tevel and say, harizu truma on all the blias in the oven, and now just mafresh challah.
Why is it automatic when a mafresh challah, a regular lady, mafresh challah, automatic goes in the blias, right?
Right, but here we're not doing challah, we're giving to everybody as tevel. Here we're giving the matzah as tevel. So we're giving it as tevel. So we say, but we just taped up our oven. We taped the oven, so we take one piece, we say, harizu challah, harizu truma on all the stuff, all the blias that are in this oven. So, guess what we just did? We just mafresh challah on part of every single batch that was made in there. So Rabelski is saying is, it works, it only works if you mafresh somebody else, but if you mafresh on yourself, the whole batch becomes putter, we are mafresh. That's what we're talking within the Makar Chaim. According to this thing, the whole idea is, if you do it for the batch itself, the Hafrashas, it all becomes cooling. Well then, as soon as they finish the run, they send it out the door, and the mashgiach comes back and says, okay, now I have to mafresh challah on all my bliyas. Boom, he just killed all the challah. Okay? Not for now. But that is what they do.
Is there nothing between the bliyas and the dough itself?
What's really different? If the Makar Chaim is right, and the Rabelski is explaining it his way, which is that the difference is between if it's batter itself or for somebody else to batter it.
It's not the batter itself, it's the bliyas and the batter.
But we're saying it's one unit. It's one unit. Okay, now, let's go on. So Shlomo Miller said, he says, no, he didn't like Rabelski's thing. He said in Sfar he didn't understand it. That's what David somehow explained it. He says, you should know. He said, you should know. You're not the first person who says kasha. It's a Chuvin Achi is his kasha. He doesn't say your answer. He has his kasha on the Makar Chaim. How can the Makar Chaim say it's a mission now? Okay. So Shlomo Miller says his own answer. I don't understand how that was better than he said. Chaim Moshe didn't say this answer. I don't know why he thought his was better, but anyhow, he says a chiddush. If you remember, I'll tell you what Shlomo Miller says. He said, I'll tell you what they say. I'll tell you a second. So Shlomo Miller says. He said, I'll tell you, he said what the answer is. Why it's not a kasha on the Makar Chaim from the Mishnah. The answer is like this. He says, in the Mishnah is talking about Hafrashas challah, so to speak, the mitzvah deraisa, the mitzvah in Eretz Yisrael, where there's a chiyuv of Hafrashas challah on every piece. So, if I'm mafresh challah on one piece, it works. If I'm not mafresh challah on the other piece, it doesn't. Whatever I was mafresh for works, whatever I wasn't mafresh for, it doesn't work. He says, with the Makar Chaim is talking about Chalas Chutz Aretz, what we deal with, regular Chalas Chutz Aretz. In Chalas Chutz Aretz, there's no mitzvah to do Hafrashah. It's not even tevel. We once talked about this. There are those who hold like that. It's not even tevel at all. There's nothing. The stuff it's just a mitzvah that every time you make it back, someone has to be mafresh challah. He says. So what happens is when you're mafresh challah, when you say a piece of this is challah, you've done the mitzvah. It's not a matter that every piece needs Hafrashas challah on it. It's that each batch needs to have Hafrashas challah. It's like a mitzvah on the person which connects to the batter. Every time there's a batter, someone has to be mafresh challah. As soon as someone is mafresh challah, they did the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that are sort of not connected to this being tevel, because he's going with the assumption, which many have, that Chalas Chutz Aretz does not make tevel. We talked about it once before. That it's not tevel at all. Okay, so if it's not tevel, I just have the mitzvah to do it. Once I did the Hafrashah, that's it. So there's no kasha for the Mishnah. The Mishnah wasn't talking about Chalas Chutz Aretz. Now,
there's no blias or anything like that.
Right, well that's what we talked about then, that if you hold there's no tevel, there's no problem with blias either. Now, aside that it's a big kiddush what he's saying, I mean, it totally doesn't read the Makar Chaim. I mean, you read the Makar Chaim, you would never believe that's what he said. Reb Chaim Moshe gives a different answer, which is a variation. It's very similar to what he's saying. Reb Chaim Moshe says like this. He says the Mishnah is only talking about cases I mentioned to you. It's only talking about chalas demai, something that's tevel, that is demai, which has lots of clues to it. And there, Reb Chaim Moshe has a whole cheshbon that you use yesh breira. What you're doing is when you make 50 hafrashas from this one batter, what you're really doing is you're retroactively, that hafrashah was for all of them simultaneously. Okay? If you do it simultaneously, you can do it for many batters. So it never has a chance for it to become back to being tevel, because what you do is you say, today I'm doing Hafrashas challah. Really what I'm doing is I'm doing 100 Hafrashas challah. 2 cakes tomorrow, 4 cakes on Thursday. But I'm doing all Hafrashas now with yesh breira, which is takin mishnah there. It all works retroactively. So it's like simultaneous. I said, this batch of tevel should be Hafrashah for all those things all at once, because of yesh breira, because it's chalas demai, and therefore the whole thing works lemafrei, and it works simultaneously. So it's never a chance we say part is tevel and part is chulin.
Right, everything is around till the end.
That's what?
Everything is still around.
It's a good question. Reb Chaim Moshe seems to be assuming I can do yesh breira, even though I do.
I'm being the tevel being Hafrashah?
Yeah, today I'm doing the Hafrashah. The stuff doesn't exist yet, and then right, the first batch is going to be all eaten up by the time the third batch gets done. You know what I mean? Before I even make the third batch. So a little bit, it's questions about how that could work. It's good we just passed Back to the Future day. So it's not good. You have to, question about how that could work. Could do them afraid on all these kind of funny cases. But if that would be true, then the tevel matzah system would work. Okay? The tevel matzah system would work because it would be the same thing. Because Chalas Chutz Aretz also has all these kulas of yesh breira and not needing minimum. If all those kulas of demai apply to Chalas Chutz Aretz also, so according to Reb Chaim Moshe, we could have the tevel matzah system would work. Okay, now after this whole back and forth about whether the Makar Chaim is or is not against the Talmud system, Shlomo says, as does the Prime Minister, he says, the Maisa is, I have good news for you. He says, most of the person don't agree with the Makar Chaim, so don't feel so bad. So even though maybe... Right, I told you. Pause. Hold a second. He says, even though according to Makar Chaim, I think, according to the way I'm saying it wouldn't work, or Belsky thinks it would work, I'm saying it wouldn't work, you should just know, don't worry about it, because most of the poskim don't hold like it anyhow, so we don't have to be machmir for the Makar Chaim. Okay? Now, even though he said, they end off like that, and say, don't be so worried about this, because most people don't pass like that. I'm not sure why. He doesn't say this. Rav Shlomo doesn't bring this, really. Maybe in passing. He doesn't really bring it. No, I'm sorry, he does. He does bring it, which is that the Makar Chaim himself is chayzer from it at the end. The Makar Chaim at the end says, no, I'm wrong. Why? He says, even though I think that I'm right logically, I have a raya that I'm wrong from our din over here. So that's what I'm talking about here. I have a raya from our din over here. It's something that the Ramah is Muramazet, the Taz, and the Shach is more clear about it, but it goes like this. A person, when you make bread, in the way in the bakery they still do it, and in the old days everyone used to do it, they didn't have little packages of powdered yeast. Yeast got into the bread from the atmosphere. It flew in. It was just out there. So you mix flour and water, and yeast gets into it. Now, if you just let yeast get into it, it's a very slow process. It takes a long time until you get enough yeast, until it rises. So what they would do is every day, when they would take a piece of the dough, put it on the side, actually put it right next to the oven, a nice and warm spot, and that piece of dough that's sitting there has a drop of yeast from the atmosphere. The yeast eats away at the bread, at the dough, and it turns into basically a big ball of yeast. It becomes a very concentrated form of yeast, and that thing tastes awful, okay, and that's what's called in English sourdough, okay, because it's taka sour, it's dough that's become sour, and in the Torah it's called sa'ar, okay, the Torah says on Pesach, now I have sa'ar, that's what it means. It means it's sourdough, it doesn't mean yeast, it means sourdough. You think so? Okay, no. The Torah says you're not allowed to have sa'ar, it doesn't mean yeast, it means you're not allowed to have sourdough, because it's royal chamer b'yis sacheris. This ball of dough, what you do is tomorrow you take that ball of dough, throw it into your batter, and now all of a sudden you're putting in this big batch of yeast. It also has a very interesting flavor to it. It's like character also, but that's how you get yeast. And then you pull a piece of dough for another piece for tomorrow, and it continues on and on and on. So now, what happens is like this. The shayla is when you pull off that piece of what the place can say is like this. When you pull off this piece of dough, what you should do is pull off the piece of dough before your mafresh challah. Pull off the piece of dough, put it on the side, that piece of dough for tomorrow, and then the mafresh challah in the batter that you have. Why? Because tomorrow you're going to take this piece of dough and throw it into tomorrow's batch. If tomorrow's batch had 90% of a sheer challah, you'll think it's part of it. And then you throw in this piece. Now, is it chayim l'challah or is it not chayim l'challah? You won't know whether you're mafresh challah or not. What they do is like this. Every day, pull off the piece of sourdough on the side before your mafresh challah. Then your mafresh challah, because you'll see you have a sheer challah. And tomorrow, when you throw the sourdough into the next batter, you'll calculate correctly that all of this is tevel, and you have to be mafresh challah. That's what they say you should do. The Ramaz Muram has added, in the document, he's more clear about it. So the Shachir also, that's what you should do. So what are they saying is, every day, you take a whole batter, pull a piece off and put it on the side, and then your mafresh challah on the batter that you have in front of you, and that piece on the side, that's tomorrow's sourdough, that piece on the side, Hafrashah is not working. The Hafrashah only works for what you have in front of you, and the piece that's on the side, the Hafrashah does not work for that piece. So you see that when you make a Hafrashah on a batch, it's possible that the Hafrashah can work on the batch, and not on the piece that's on the side. The piece that was pulled that's separated does not have Hafrashah for it. So the Makar Chaim says, you see from here that when you make a Hafrashah on a batter, it does not have to work on the whole thing. If you have in mind that if the dafka should not work for part of it, then it doesn't work for that part. And this from Makar Chaim says, Hagan that have rayas from the Shach and Tag later on. No, this proves that it's not true. He's miyashiv that. If you keep your cheshbon, the Shach and Tag is about the long challah from the chasana. He says, you have to say is, what they meant was, really betzim you could do it, but they were concerned about brachal v'atolah. They weren't saying that you couldn't do Hafrashah. They just meant that the problem with brachal v'atolah. Why should 50 ladies make a bracha instead of one lady? Okay. But, so he says is, so you see from this, you see from our din that it's possible to make a Hafrashah on a batter and leave part of it, not include part of it. Okay? Now, I'll just say to you that it's a good raya for what the Makar Chaim is talking about, and it's a good raya for himself to be chayzer from what he said. It doesn't yet prove that the Tevel Matzah system works. And the reason is because, in the case of the Mekar Chaim, in the case of this Mordechai that I just said to you, this Shach, etc. that I said to you, the case of the Mekar Chaim, everybody's cases are that the thing you're doing the Hafrashah on and the part that's not having Hafrashah are separated from each other. What you do is you physically pull apart the piece of sourdough, put it on the side, and then you make the Hafrashah on this. So what you've done is, what we see there is that when the things are not connected anymore, you've separated them from each other, then Hafrashah can work on part and on the other part. The case of the Mekar Chaim, the guy had a batch of tevel, and now the pieces are mixed in with other things. I'm doing Hafrashah on this side, doesn't work for that side. So the case of Chaim Mercer was, I forgot what his case was. The case of all these kind of cases, the person doing the Hafrashah on a piece on one section, which is physically separated from the other section. Okay, the case of the Tevel Matzah is not like that. In the case of the Tevel Matzah, the pieces are all still in the same box. We've got a box where we have a chunk of dough, and we're doing Hafrashah from one part, and we don't yet have a raya that you can limit the Hafrashah to one section and not put on the other section. But anyhow, to summarize we're up to now, I have one little more thing to tell you, but to summarize we're up to now, there was some little started that the Mekar Chaim is not like this Tevel Matzah system. Ravelsky tried to get around it by explaining why the Mekar Chaim didn't apply in this case. Okay, the Mekar Chaim was to certain cases. Lamai says the Mekar Chaim himself is chayzer from it. So not only is he chayzer, I didn't see it in Sarya, but they tell me in the Siddur Derech Chaim, in his Siddur, he writes beferish that you could be mekel. I didn't see it in Sarya. And so not only does he himself chayzer, but a lot of the places can disagree with it. So we were able to put that on the side and say, okay, we don't have to be chayzer for that possibility. Okay, so we've saved Tevel Matzah system for now. Okay, but one more question that he says, I have to just say one more question that he says, and that is, he asks another question. He says I'm saying this shortly, I'm saying this briefly, because I don't really know all the details of this. He says there's a din, he brings it from a Mordechai also, that says that a person is not allowed to be mafresh challah min ha'afui on things that are raw. You can't be mafresh challah from baked things on things that are not yet baked. Okay? It's connected, it's somehow connected to the din that you're not allowed to be termed, what's the word? Ein mafrishin midavish nigma malachta, davish loy nigma malachta. That's mission trumas. You're not allowed to be mafresh from something that's nigma malachta and not nigma malachta, or more nigma malachta and less nigma malachta. The mashmur's problem is that that's a din deraisa. You're not allowed to do that. It's mutter b'diavad, but with the raisa, interesting. It's a chiv deraisa, but b'diavad it's okay. So you're not allowed to be mafresh on something that's nigma malachta and not nigma malachta. So if you use tevel matzahs, so he says, I don't understand how if you use tevel matzahs, the matzah is already baked, how you can use that, be mafresh from that on dough. Now, we're saved from that by using tevel dough instead of tevel matzahs, because we're being mafresh on dough, so we're good. We're good. The first shiloh would have applied to us, but this shiloh doesn't apply to us. But he asks the question, I don't know others who explain why not.
Come back at night, because if you came here to work on the document, you should work on the press.
Right, so seemingly they can avoid this problem by saying that they're doing the Hafrashah when it's baked. Okay, just like they do for Bli L'Raka. We'll get to that. When we get to it, for Bli L'Raka, they say the Hafrashah is chal when it's baked. So they could get around this problem by just changing the nusach and saying the Hafrashah is when it's baked. No big deal. What's the big deal of baked? No one's going to eat it before then anyhow. So, well, and that you're saying, and that's also b'diavad. To do when you bake is also b'diavad. So,
the same ones, it's work to work. It's nothing to do anymore.
No. So, but why should they set up the din is you're not allowed to do hafrashah from baked on dough? So why don't they just say the hafrashah should be when it's baked?
Right, why did they completely on that?
What do you think?
You can't say let's do it now, and if it doesn't work, it should be.
No, he's saying if in din you're not supposed to do this, I want to chal later. He's saying that's right. But that's also a b'diavad. That's also a b'diavad. Yeah, we'll get the mukav is coming. We'll get to not today. We'll get to that. So but it's a question. So if he just sees it as a question, I mean, the Rambam's mashal that said the right, so you not do this from baked or not baked. I'm not sure if everybody says that like that, but that's how he said. Anyhow, so he leaves it as a question. That's only a question on tevel matzah, not on tevel dough.